co-creating this project with artist Amanda Lynch, and we've brought Artists Residencies to Sea Wing because of the really rich history of when the prison had women prisoners held here during the Victorian era. And we also, as curators, both of us, are interested in bringing art to unusual spaces outside of galleries and white wall spaces. And due to the pandemic, a lot of artists have felt isolated and not been able to show their work to the public over the last 18 months. So this was a really fantastic opportunity to bring a group of women artists together, looking at women's history in the prison. So this project is quite unique in the sense that it has artists on site, but also 5 artists working remotely, sending work through the post to put into their cells, or we're using digital media to communicate.
I spent a lot of time over lockdown marking time and drawing time and thinking about how we experience time, and I think because we were in kind of unusual situations, an unusual situation, that our experience of time was very different. So when I had the invitation to come and spend some time in the cell and mark time, it was too good an opportunity to miss, really. People have been really engaged with what we're doing, and because I work really abstractly with, and I just kind of do lots of repetitive mark making, my work isn't necessarily that obvious about, when the first sort of reading of it. So having the opportunity to talk to people about the ideas behind the work and why I'm making the marks and what I'm doing, it really opens the work up, and people can it's much more accessible to people.
Emma Rose is an artist who is working remotely during her residency. She's interested in why women were imprisoned in Shepton Mallet prison in the 1800s and has discovered that theft was the most frequent crime. She has created an experience within a cell so that it feels like as if you're walking into a home. While researching the female prisoners, Emma purposely chose women that had stolen everyday items. These items are generally lost within today's setting of a home. For example, an umbrella and sheets are very much overlooked.
The work I've produced was not really the work I expected to come here to do. It's very much been inspired by the prisoners. I have one up on the board who, while here in the prison, actually sadly killed her infant son. But all the signs were that actually it was postnatal depression, which is something I actually suffered from with my second son. There's so many others that seem to be just suffering from mental illness rather than being criminals. And I just felt a connection with those.
And then we have Sally's work, Sally Wilkinson. And there are names of 42 women. And she looks like makes text work and collaging, and they have the sentences and what they were charged with. And she's also asking visitors to write their responses to the prison, which then goes into this big ballot box that she sent out. And because Sally's working remotely, and I will open this and collect all the visitors' responses with their emails and names and send them to Sally, and she will make one of her collages out of the words, which I think is a really lovely idea.
I was really inspired by the research I'd done online and reading through the prison register entries of prisoners that were incarcerated during the Victorian era. So I decided that I would like to make Victorian aprons, or Victorian styled aprons, and so I decided to create them from an antique linen smock, and I chose 2 female prisoners, and I've listed their name and their crime and their sentence on the aprons, and my artwork is called What Has Become of Me.
I wanted to come and experience the prison firsthand by being here a lot and responding to the space. So my way of writing is to experience and absorb the atmosphere of the place. So originally I'd thought of communication and the suffragettes, but I had been thinking more about how they communicated with each other. But then the idea of the balloons came sort of almost near the start of the project, because of the idea that they encapsulate air and breath and voice, and actually just using them in the space, because it's a prison cell, and how many prison cells would have balloons in them? So I wanted that contrast of what the prison cell's used for and what the outside world might be celebrating at the same time.
So as well as being a co-creator of the project, I'm also a contributing artist, and my work is inspired by my research, which led me to looking into the prison officers that were here when it was a Victorian prison. I took on a persona of the only named officer that I could find in the research, Emily, and started wearing keys around my waist. But what's special about these keys is that I've laid the keys out and put tags on them and asked each visitor that comes into the cell to write a number that means something special to them. And then they place the keys in a letterpress to keep them organised. Then they write why that number is special to them on an index card, which goes on my pinboard and finally gets filed away. But as the keys build up and they start to overspill from the letterpress, I started putting them around my waist and carrying them with me every day, and as I dress in the persona of Emily. And this means sort of the caring and keeping people's memories safe, as well as having this lovely sound of living keys as I walk around the wing, checking in on the artists to make sure they're okay. Artist and co-creator Amanda Lynch has been working remotely during the prison residencies. She has used a blend of digital technologies and the Royal Mail Post to communicate with myself and other artists during the residency. She's created collages inspired by former prisoners and their crimes. Some of these crimes would be seen as relatively minor by today's standards. Some of the collages are based on information found in historical documents, and others are fictional, representing the many women whose information was not properly recorded. Joanne Putney is using the key themes of isolation and silence, contributing to the unravelling of the individual for her prison residency. Her work is called Towers and Flowers. Symbolism is used to emphasise a theme in the form of the Tower of Isolation. Flowers are used with their Victorian language, offering secret and silent messages. The Victorian prison punishment of separation and silence is defined by mask imagery.
Unexpected stuff has happened, which is great. But I have actually managed to sort of go back to what I had originally thought I would be doing. That has sort of it's sort of gone in a circle, I suppose. I had an intention, I've worked around it and through it, and then it's come. Fruition's not the right word, but and actually that's quite a nice word in a way, because of the notion of it being about pregnancy and birthing and sort of the hidden aspect of lives in prison, but also the transformative stages of pregnancy, the hidden ways, the not knowing, the wondering. I was saying that I'd sort of gone back to my original thoughts about it, so that this idea of life suspended, a life on hold kind of thing. So these were made in the night.
I thought I'd be able to do some mark making and kind of counting time whilst wearing the ceremonial costume, so combining the performance and a mapping of space and time at the same time. But it didn't quite work. That, very quickly that became apparent that was too tricky and that they were separate things. So then I've just been walking and mapping time separate from making the costume, which has become mostly about memory rather than combining the two. Also kind of realised that coming in it was all about the history and the history of the women in C Wing, whereas now I'm here it's more about how the building feels, which seems to be more about the actual building and the presence of the building rather than the presence of the people who were here.
It's really exciting when someone's come to see the prison and then they start to engage with the art and have a look round. It's a nice opportunity to invite them into the world of contemporary art that they might not have gone to before.
I was curious. I have worked at Shepton on art projects and motivational coaching projects, and so some of the geography of the prison is familiar, but coming into an empty prison was very different, and I felt quite overwhelmed. And the thing that I suppose that there was a feeling of despair, actually, despair about the whole business of imprisonment. And that's really where the idea of respect came from. When I stepped over the threshold in the first cell, when I came into the building, I was suddenly struck by, I'm moving from one space into another, and this used to be the private space or the space designated to a prisoner. and all intents and purposes that was his domestic space. That was his space, and so that triggered a series of ideas. The theme I'm using, which is respect, is something I'm hoping that people will take away, and it'll perhaps trigger things in their minds and their memories, as it did with me when I came here.
I'm enjoying that, noticing the prisons of my life, do you know, the everyday life, and bizarrely enough, it feels quite free to be here, and taking the time to exist in the space and see what happens. I worked at Holloway in London in the mother and babies unit, supporting the mothers with the separation when the babies had to go. And somehow that was so painful in my experience. I totally, forgot, left somewhere. And so when I walked in here, all that kind of came back flooding, and it was like, okay. But my initial plan was to bring some bits with technology that I'm also working at the moment and recognize or sense presence through sound.